It's lovely to see you all here, and I hope everybody's been having a good time at the conference. My lecture is obviously about nothing is impossible. And as you probably already know, I'm a filmmaker. I do visual effects. I've done visual effects for about 42 years now. I was one of the first digital artists on the planet back around 1980. So right now, I'm just going to play you a quick demo reel so you can see some of the work I've done. This is just feature film work that I've done. I've either been an artist or a visual effects supervisor on this work. And there's a whole bunch of television work I've done as well, but that's not shown in this reel. But we can talk about any of that later on when you want to. Anyway, that's my reel. It's a little bit of a look at what I've done over the years. And the thing for me was that it all started as a kid watching TV and seeing editorial tricks, and I had no idea what they were doing or how they were doing them, but I was fascinated by them. And then when I was about 10 years old, I had a magic trick. I had a magic lesson. And I remember the magician was a guy called Gerald Taylor, who was a magician in Melbourne. And I said, so what tricks are you going to teach me? And he said, I'm not going to teach you tricks. And I said, well, why am I here? And he said, well, that's the real question. He said, so watch this. And he put a 50-cent piece in his coin in his hand. And he said, I want you to watch that coin very carefully. Don't take your eyes off it. And he closed his hand. He said, now blow on that hand. And I blew on the hand, and he opened his hand, and the coin was gone. And my eyes did a full Tex Avery kind of poker thing. And he said, that's what I'm going to teach you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, anybody can come in here and buy a trick and learn how to do it. And they go home and they read the instructions, and 5 minutes later, they call themselves a magician. He said, that's just learning a trick. But what happened in you right there, that's the magic. And that's what I want to teach you. And that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I wanted to do visual effects. I didn't even know what visual effects were at the time, but I wanted to do that thing that I had seen on TV. And I'd also seen the original Star Trek TV series. And so I was inspired to create illusions. And when I first started, the technology did not exist. Everything that we did was handmade. We were doing news graphics for ABC News in Melbourne, Australia, and everything was handmade. I mean, if we had a picture of like a news box that went over the newsreader's shoulder with a picture of Reagan and Gorbachev who'd been in a conference together, we would have to go into Life magazine and find photos of each of them that were roughly the same size and cut them out with a scalpel and glue them down and airbrush a shadow under it and rub down letraset text. And that was our high-tech graphic. And if we were lucky, the 7 or 8 of us working on the news maybe got 9 graphics done a day, but it would take from 8 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night to get those graphics done. And I was 17. I was the youngest one in the department, and the art director called me and he said, I need you to come into the office and sit down and close the door behind you. And I thought, great, I'm going to lose my job. And he said, no, you're not going to lose your job. He said, I want to talk to you about something that's kind of weird. And they said, he said, that big box that's sitting out in the corridor? They say it's a computer that does graphics. And we just cracked up laughing. Like, yeah, right. I mean, we've been looking at CAD systems and all kinds of other systems that were around at the time, but they were all mainly architectural computer systems and nothing that did what we needed it to do. And he said, look, you've got the least program commitments of anybody, so take it out of the box and put it together with engineering, see what you think. And when it's a piece of rubbish, we'll let it go. And this thing was the original Quantel paint box. And so engineering put it together, and I jumped on it, and instantly my brain just did a mind meld with this machine. It was the first tool that really had an active pen and tablet. The tablet weighed about as much as my car. The pen was made out of steel. The cable was made out of steel. It was impossible. But when I touched pen to tablet and the cursor moved on the screen, it was just magic. And the paint box was an incredibly versatile tool. The systems at the time had, maybe 16 colors that you could use. Other systems that were around that were trying to do what Paintbox could do. Paintbox had 14 million colors. And so we were able to simulate things like airbrush and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so things that at the time were completely impossible, like turning around a news graphic faster than a few hours. We then went from like 8 of us doing maybe 9 graphics a day to 2 of us doing 50 graphics a day. And we just cranked this stuff out. And so the thing that's been amazing to watch over the years is the advancement of technology from that to where we are now. The things that were completely impossible at the time, um, you look at something like Star Wars, and Star Wars revolutionized the whole approach to filmmaking and in story and visual effects and everything. Um, the film at the time was virtually impossible, and they had to create a company, Industrial Light and Magic, just to be able to make the visual effects, because none of the technology existed. Literally none of the equipment existed. They had to make the equipment, to make the cameras, to make the optical printers, so that they could make the shots that George had in his head. So I've spent, my life kind of trying to do the impossible. And as a visual effects supervisor, that really is our job, because the basic definition of it is that anything that is either too dangerous for the cast and crew, or too expensive, or just physically impossible to do, falls on the hands of visual effects. And even though they may be impossible under all of those kind of levels, at the end of the day, we're still going to make it happen. And so I worked on Star Trek for a lot of years. I worked on Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, First Contact, Insurrection, TV shows, and the films. And we had to come up with the impossible every day. And we didn't have hours or weeks to do it. We had minutes. So we had to think very quickly, and working in commercials was, in commercials and episodic television, was a great way to come up with very quick solutions to the problem. And so at the end of the day, my job is really as first and foremost, as a problem solver. And then as a compositor, when I was physically putting the shots together, I used to call myself a glorified sandwich maker, because I just take, really nice elements and put them together and make this great sandwich that was the final shot. But Star Trek was very good to me. I got nominated for 9 Emmys and I won 4 of them. And that was just an amazing thing. And the thing that has been constant all the way through my career has been that there is stuff that is still impossible to do. And yet at every turn, we, teams that I'm on, or, the multitude of other teams around the world that are doing visual effects, every day come up with a way to make the impossible possible. And then those things become kind of standard, and then they become natural. I mean, when you look at the original computers that we were working on, that, you had to put an extension on your building to be able to house the air conditioning unit that would keep it operational. You go from something like that to this, it's astounding. And then these things are 1,000 times more powerful than the computers that we were on in those days. So I just like to, I love the challenge of making things possible. And the thing that has always inspired me, it was a story that came from a movie called Silent Running. It was made in the 70s and directed by Doug Trumbull, who was the visual effects supervisor on 2001. And Doug had a scene on a spaceship with a couple of little robots that had to perform an operation on Bruce Dern. And so he had designed in the script a mechanical arm that would come down and unfold and perform these operations. And they went to actually do it, and there was nothing that did that. And his dad, Don, was a famous old special effects guy from Hollywood. One of Don's jobs in his early career was that he was the guy holding the fishing line that held up the Cowardly Lion's tail as they walked down the yellow brick road in Wizard of Oz. And so he gave this job to his dad, and he said, so I need this mechanical arm that will do something like this. Is it possible? And Don went, yeah, sure, we'll come up with something. And so he did, and it made it into the movie. And shortly after the movie was released, there were a group of guys who were doctors who'd gone out to see a movie, and they just picked that one. And they saw this scene, and they were all floored and couldn't believe what they were looking at on the screen. And they contacted the studio, and they eventually worked their way through all the people to get to Don and Doug. And they said, the reason we want to talk to you guys is that we are the designers, the leading designers of prosthetic limbs in the world, and we have been trying to work out a mechanism that would make us have the ability to create a realistic human arm. We have never seen anything until this. Would you be interested in working with us? And so Don ended up teaming up with those guys, and this silly little gag that he came up with to solve his son's problem in the movie became the basis of these prosthetic limbs that people wore until recent time when they became digital. And it's amazing that the things that we do as fantasy have an ability to kind of turn around and become very real. So really nothing is impossible. And I continue to do that every day, and it's a great passion. And it's always great to see an audience's reaction to things that they know are impossible, but they don't know why. Anyway, I would love to have questions from you guys. It's nice to see faces up there. And does anybody have a question? None?
Sure, I have a question.
Yeah, Robert, yeah.
So, it's not, I know you do special effects, but within the field of special effects even, do you have a particular expertise? I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, because I'm far from that field. But I know that movie making is a collaborative art form. And I have worked a little bit with Maya and some softwares, and even those seem to be designed for teams of people. I'm wondering, I mean, that's the way it feels to me. I'm wondering if there's a specific skill that you bring to a particular special effect. That's my first question. And then my second question would be, what is the hardest thing you had to do, that it seemed would be impossible, that you were able to be a part of a team that pulled off?
Great questions. Yes, you're right. There are multiple disciplines within the job, and the softwares determine that people have to have very specific skills to operate them. Like you have to be a 3D animator, but within the context of being a 3D animator, you have to understand the way bodies move. You're an animator, so motion is a huge thing. You have to understand how things move, and then you've got to be able to have the technical wherewithal to operate a computer to make 3D models move within that computer. My specific specialty was compositing, and I was a graphic designer and illustrator to begin with. But I, as a compositor, my job is to take multiple elements, like a background that was shot on set, a blue screen element that was shot somewhere else, a matte painting that somebody else did, a piece of animation that somebody else did. In some cases, only a couple of elements. In other cases, hundreds of elements, and blend them all together so that using the right kind of contrast and color and all the tricks of the trade that we use, you make something that looks completely real to the viewer's eye. Mm-hmm. So yeah, compositing is my specialty. And so from that point of view, it's just observation. Observation is a huge thing, and being able to say, this is what this shot needs to make it look real. As for the hardest shot that I've ever done,
yeah,
I had a couple of shots in Birdman that were incredibly difficult. But still, I think the hardest shot I've ever done was it's a shot that was in that demo reel of Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet running toward camera in Titanic, being chased by a wall of water. And at the time we were making the movie, I was working on a couple of hundred shots, and one of Jim Cameron's producers came to me and said, so we've got this problem, we've got a shot. Jim wants to put it in the international trailer, which is coming out in like a month. We took it to Industrial Light and Magic, and they looked at the elements and they said, this shot is impossible. So then we went to Digital Domain that Jim owned at the time, and they said the same thing. So we've been to the two biggest visual effects companies in the world, and they've said no. What do you think? And I looked at the elements and I went, well, I guess it's possible. Ultimately it's just time and money. And if you got the money, I'll make the time. And so they went back to Jim and they told him that, and he said, that's the correct answer. Give him the job. and so I did the job. And what it was, people always think that it's water that we were adding to the shot. It was actually it was real water. It was the walls were made out of steel, reinforced steel, and it was it was an incredibly huge dump tank of water, dumping water into the set with stunt doubles running down the hallway. And my job was to take the stunt doubles' heads off and put Kate and Leo's heads on. But it's in slow motion, it's for 10 seconds, it's right in your face, it's completely unforgiving. And their skin's jiggling in slow motion, and the hair's flapping around their faces and sticking to them, and water's splashing, and all that stuff had to be hand painted, because at the time there was no 3D animation that could do that. And so it ended up being a little bit longer. It was 2.5 months. I spent 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2.5 months doing the shot. And at the end of it, Jim came up to me at one of the screenings and he said, "So you know why that was so hard, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I hand painted the whole thing." And he goes, "No, there's a much cooler reason for it." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "It's never been done before." And it turned out that it was the very first time a full head replacement had been done like that in feature film. And it was fun for me, because then going forward, maybe like 15 years, I was working on the 2 final Twilight movies. And we had the guys from a company in Los Angeles who specialize in head replacements, digital head replacements, who had done Benjamin Button. And they have this incredible machine that the actor sits inside, and it simulates light on them to match the shot, and then they can extract that and put it onto a 3D model. And I said to them, "So how did you come up with this incredible thing," which they had won an Academy Award for? And they said, "Well, when we got Benjamin Button, we were looking through the history of visual effects, head replacements, and we picked like a few hundred hardest ones we could find. And over a period of a process of elimination, we cut them all down to one. And we found the one that we thought was the hardest one, but we had no idea how it had been done. And then we tried to make a machine that would reverse engineer doing what that shot did." And I said, "So what was the shot?" And he goes, "Well, there's this shot in Titanic." And I said, "Yeah, the hallway shot?" Goes, "Yeah, that's my shot." So it was nice that shot ended up being kind of a template for technology, for a further advancement in the technology. And so now, head replacements are used all the time and done much more simply and much more quickly. But yeah, that was a hard one.